Thank you very much, Randy. We'll go to your calls. First up, Joe in Kansas City, Kansas. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Mr. Hanegraaff. I'm glad that I got through to you. I have a question that I haven't heard you answer, at least not too often, on the Bible Answer Man. And bear with me, I'm kind of nervous. It's a very personal question. It's a two-part question. A couple of weeks ago, my women's group of about 15 women were talking about the topic of teenage promiscuity among Christians. And I made the comment that some statistics show only 40% of teens are actually having sex on a regular basis. And it would be nice if something positive would be said about the other 60%. Well, they all looked at me and started talking at once, saying, oh no, you wouldn't want to know what Christian teens were doing out there and how they get around those purity vows and rings. The more I listened to what they were saying, the more heart sick I felt. And I still feel that way now. It's like a deep, godly sorrow came over me. What can Christian parents these days do? Are we living in the times like that of Romans 1 and some of the other scriptures that speak about the world in the last days? In our group, it seemed like the women had just all given up and said, what can anyone do? They are going to do it anyway, no matter what we say.
Well, Joe, I think that you were right to not only look at the glass half empty, but see the glass half full. And I think it was a very astute observation on your part to say, if 40% of teens are involved in sexual promiscuity, there's still another 60% just on the cold, hard mathematics of that equation. But having said that, sexual promiscuity certainly is rampant in our culture, and there are systemic reasons for that. There's systemic reasons for why that is true, even within the church. Because there are many within the church who are genuinely sincere in their faith, but they're also genuinely secular in their thinking. And that needs to be understood. They've grown up in an epicenter of philosophical naturalism. And so they've been taught, as it were, to make a false dichotomy between faith and reason. So on the one hand, they believe in Jesus, but they don't see how that applies to their sexuality. But it does. And the antidote, therefore, is to get teens to think Christianly. Then they'll start to realize that the rules regarding sex are not arbitrary. They are, in fact, seriously penned and proposed in ironclad fashion by a God who knows what's best for us. And so the idea is to get people beyond this dichotomy, this false dichotomy between faith and reason. There's an article in which Nancy Pearcey writes about a collegiate website which advises young women on how to have a happy hookup. And that website says, get clear consent and mutual agreement to engage in sexual acts. And then the whole hookup experience will be much more positive for everyone involved. Now, when you read that, you think, well, this is a collegiate website, and therefore, what could you expect? But what Nancy Pearcey saw next is the author's bio. And this happened to be a website which was by someone who was a student, a lady who was a student at a conservative Christian college. So when even Christian young people are buying into the hookup culture, it's clear that traditional ways of teaching biblical morality are no longer effective. And the reason they're not is because these who are participating are sincere in faith, but thoroughly secular in their thoughts, and consequently, they're thoroughly secular in their behavior as well. I think getting this article, and by the way, you may be able to find it online, I think that would be very helpful and apropos to take back to the women's group and look through that, because there are a lot of insights for what you can do about it.
Oh, that would be good, because it seemed like they were all just giving up on this generation.
No, I don't think we should.
The wrong, attitude to have.
Exactly. You couldn't be more correct about that. Look, we have bought into this idea that history simply goes from high to low, and then there comes the ending. But that's not the biblical idea. The biblical idea is that history has ebbs and flows. So there are times of great apostasy, and there are times of great revival. So we shouldn't think that we couldn't have another revival in our culture. But if we're going to have that, it starts in the house of God. You don't have revival in the culture without having reformation in the pew. I mean, you look at what happened during a very dark epoch in Christian history, and then you have one man who nails 95 theses to a castle door in Wittenberg and starts a mighty reformation. We don't know that that can't happen today. In fact, if we look at history, we've seen those kinds of things happen over and over again. So rather than looking at it as though we're done, we have to look at it as though we have an opportunity to make a difference. We look at the culture and we think, wow, isn't that horrible? And then we point our finger at the culture and the pagans and say, look what they're doing. Of course that's what they're doing. They're pagans. What else would they do? The question now is, we're Christians. What should we be doing? And the answer to that question so often is, we're not pursuing God. What we're doing is we're walking an aisle, we're praying a prayer, and then we're living as baptized secular humanists as opposed to those who are cultural initiators as opposed to cultural imitators. So I think your point's well taken, and I wouldn't drop it.
I agree with you totally. And the other thing is, we have to understand that if we don't do something, we're taking away from our youth something that is so joyful in the anticipation of that wedding night that they may never experience. They won't have that experience. And that is, to me, that was the most important part of the whole wedding ceremony. And being married was looking forward to giving myself to that one special person. And I see now that people don't even think about that. They're either having sex outside of marriage or living together. And then, what do? You wake up in the morning, you put on your wedding clothes, you go have the ceremony, go to a party, and come home, and it's over with. There's nothing special anymore. And we must bring that specialness back into what it means to have a relationship. And I'm not quite sure they get that in the 20s, people who are in their 20s and 30s.
Well said. And as Nancy Pearcey points out, young people don't need simple rules. They need reasons to make sense of the rules, which is to say, they need to be taught the worldview rationale for biblical morality. Otherwise, it is possible for Christian young people to be, again, sincere in faith and yet thoroughly secular in thought, and consequently thoroughly secular in their behavior.